Activists offer mixed reactions to oil cleanup projects in the Niger Delta. Nigeria and others in the West African sub-region feeling economic impacts of the partial border closure. In international news, Iran threatens full-scale war if Saudi's U.S. attack. And in sports, Independent Corrupt Practices Commission (ICPC) investigates head of the women's unit of the Nigeria Football Federation.
This is ANN News.
I am Olajumoke Olatunji. Nigeria, Africa's largest oil producer, pumps out its most lucrative natural resource from the Niger Delta. While companies like Shell and ExxonMobil operate there and extract billions of dollars worth of crude oil, most of the people in the region are extremely poor. Their traditional livelihoods as farmers and fishermen have been badly affected by more than 6,000 oil spills that have damaged the environment for more than half a century. A $1 billion environmental remediation project that was launched in the Ogoni community in 2016 has been denounced by 33-year-old petroleum engineer and president of the Ogoni Youth Federation, Legbosi Yamabana, who says the project is fraught with corruption. The project was recommended by the United Nations Environment Programme, and it gets most of its financing from international oil companies, including Shell, which has released an initial $10 million. But Yamabana says, quote, the money is being used in the most corrupt way. It says the Ogoni people still drink from polluted sources of water and still swim and bathe in that same water. Finiface Dunamene of the Youth and Environmental Advocacy Center agrees. It says HYPREP has not met the basic needs of communities. Ogoni Youth Federation, which claims to have 11,000 members, has filed a lawsuit against HYPREP, the government agency in charge of coordinating the cleanup. Environmentalist says it could take 30 years to sanitize and restore the region's environment. The partial closure of Nigeria's borders is having an economic impact. The West African currency has crashed against the naira to a new record low at the open markets because of the border closures, and Nigeria are grappling with food price hikes. Reporter Deji Badmos has more on the story.
At normal times, this whole area would have been jammed with people and grains of all colors and shapes. But these are not normal times for Dawanau Market, Africa's largest grains market in the commercial city of Nigeria's Kano State. Due to its significance, big-time farmers and exporters from across the continent have made the market a go-to place for all their grains. Every Friday, thousands from across Africa gather here to buy and sell grains. But since the partial border closure by the Nigerian government, commercial activities here have taken a nosedive, and traders like Abubakar Ibrahim are seriously feeling the heat.
When the border was open, business was moving smoothly, but now the closure has reduced our sales. We usually send goods outside the country through the border, and other goods also come in from across the borders. But now we are unable to do that. It's even worse for us who are close to the borders with Niger, Benin, Ghana and Togo. Sometimes some goods take longer time before they cross the border, and some like fish get spoiled in the border, and that has been a great loss to us in the business.
And it's not just the traders who are complaining, buyers are complaining as well. Because farmers and traders from across the borders have difficulty bringing their grains to the market, the amount of grains available has significantly reduced, causing a spike in price.
I bought corn, 210 naira, 200, but today I buy it 230, which is even increased more than what I bought last time. And we are seeing that this time around, at least they are now harvesting things. The price is supposed to beat down, but it's now going higher. Yes, there is an effect of border, because when things were, the border was, especially the rice, it's even higher than what we bought last time. I bought last time Kura 550, but it's now 700 naira, the Kura rice. That is the one we plant in our own country.
The market is also a source of employment for thousands of local people who earn their living here. The reduced commercial activities now mean reduced amount of work available. The government says leaving the borders fully open is aiding smuggling activities, which it says is a great hindrance to the country's attainment of food self-sufficiency. But these traders are appealing that the action be relaxed and that local farmers should be supported.
We are pleading with the government to please find a way to open the borders. We have been complaining to the government to help patronize our business and help buy crops for plantation for the farmers.
Nigeria hopes to become the next exporter of rice by 2020, setting a target of becoming self-sufficient in local production. To create incentives for domestic production, the Central Bank of Nigeria has also restricted forests for food imports. But as well-intentioned as those policies might be, for traders here at Dawanu Market, they are at the receiving end.
The House of Representatives has waded into the issue of Central Bank's new policy of bank charges and deposits and withdrawals. The House of Representatives has ordered the Apex Bank to suspend the planned cashless policy. The House has mandated the Committee on Banking to investigate the policy and report to the House in a month. ANN reported on Wednesday that bank customers making cash deposits or withdrawals in Lagos, Ogun, Kano, Abia State, Anambra, Rivers and the Federal Capital Territory were to pay a 3% processing fee for cash withdrawals and 2% for deposits above $500,000 naira for individual accounts. Businesses were to be charged 5% processing fees for withdrawals and 3% for lodgements above 3 million naira. These charges will only apply in a few states. Central Bank's cashless policy will be implemented in March next year. The Rivers State Police Command says it has arrested an alleged serial killer of young women. Police Public Relations Officer Frank Umba says Gracious David West, whom he also described as a cultist, was seized on his way to Uyo, Akwa Ibom State from Port Harcourt. The command says the suspect was caught on camera some days back leaving a hotel after strangling a lady after a sexual romp with her. The police are yet to identify the lady. Police said at least 8 women had fallen into David West's trap since July. 26-year-old David West, who is from Buguma local government area of Rivers State, is said to have made useful statements to the police. Ondo State government says it demolished bear parlors and makeshift buildings in its government-reserved areas and containers in Akure because they had become meeting points for men of the underworld. State Commissioner for Physical Planning and Urban Development, Rashid Badmos, told the News Agency of Nigeria that Alagbaka GRA residents had petitioned the state government about the activities of criminal elements in the area. It said the demolition exercise was to beautify the airport road access. Badmos said there was never an approval to sell bear in GRAs. It said after the State Executive Council deliberated on the issue, it decided on eviction notices which were issued to the bear parlors.
Coming up, African news, exiled Tunisian former president dies in Saudi Arabia. And later, international news. Iran threatens Saudi Arabia, US of full-scale war should they attack its interests.
You are watching ANN.
Dear mommy, you went out that night with the baby in your tummy, but you did not come back. The baby is very fine and she eats and sleeps a lot. Everyone says that you are in a better place, but I miss you so much. I keep asking them, where is the better place, but nobody answers me. Auntie Kemi just hugs me and says go and play. Mommy, I miss you. Please, when are you coming home?
I still don't miss you, Mom. And in honor of your memory, I'm a doctor today working with the MTN Foundation to save mothers and children every day.
Ending mother and child mortality in Nigeria is dear to us. We will keep strengthening this most important bond just for you.
Welcome back. This is ANN News. Now to African stories. Tunisia's former president, El Abidine Ben Ali, has died on Thursday in Saudi Arabia, where he had been in exile since 2011. Ben Ali was overthrown in a popular uprising that led to revolts across the Arab world. A former security chief, Ben Ali ruled Tunisia for 23 years after taking power as prime minister in 1987. Tunisia's including Islamists hailed his bloodless, non-violent takeover. He went on to make Tunisia a moderate voice in the Arab world, while Western governments viewed him as an effective bulwark against Islamic extremism despite criticism of his slow move toward democracy. He consolidated his rule by mustering the opposition, keeping strong control of the media and armed forces, and eventually extending the number of terms he was allowed to serve under the constitution. He was 83. Cameroon law courts were quiet on Thursday as lawyers stayed off work for a fourth day, defying government's threats. They have continued their strike to protest against what they say are widespread unbearable rights violations that include torture, illegal and prolonged detention of accused persons. Observers are saying this action may negatively affect the dialogue President Paul Biya had called with separatist leaders to find a solution to the secessionist demands. At least 1 million cases have piled up in courts across the country this week without being heard. President Paul Biya had given instructions for judicial processes to be sped up after a prison protest last July over poor conditions that included overcrowded detention centers. A delegate at Cameroon's Ministry of Justice, John Dedeo Momo, has offered reassurances to the lawyers, saying the government has called on the military, the police and others in the judicial system to immediately address the lawyers' concerns. Uganda's oil and gas project preparations have stalled after companies operating in the country pulled back from their activities following disagreements on investments. The dispute is threatening Uganda's hopes of becoming a major oil and gas supplier. Michael Baleke has that report.
It's more than a decade since Uganda discovered oil in the western part of the country bordering DR Congo. But preparations to take the oil out of the ground and onto the market have hit another obstacle.
The net impact of this is that it is going to be very difficult to encourage or to entice more Ugandans to join oil and gas because of the uncertainty. And of course, there are the obvious things like the cost of money people have borrowed to buy equipment, to be ready. And all of a sudden, bleak.
French oil company Total E&P Uganda recently suspended all its activities following the collapse of a deal to buy a stake in British oil company Tullow. China's national offshore oil company Sinopec is also part of the transaction.
The companies cannot go away forever because they have a resource that they have found, a resource that they have already booked in their reserves, in their stock exchange. So what is required is for us to get back to the table and engage, and meaningfully engage and move forward.
China National Offshore Oil Corporation, Sinopec, Total and Tullow have jointly discovered an estimated 6.5 billion barrels of crude, 1.4 billion of which are recoverable. The latest disagreements on investments in Uganda's oil and gas are likely to further delay timelines for oil production earlier scheduled for 2022. But the government is hopeful that a final investment decision will be reached before the end of the year. The current standoff also stems from disagreements over Uganda's tax laws.
These are laws that bring value to the country. These are laws that have been benchmarked on international practices. What is really at stake is what is the value? And asking for tax for this country is value that is required. And I think that cannot be changed over a transaction like this.
The government now says it will convene a meeting in the coming days to discuss the status of the final investment decision. This is expected to unlock funds for projects like the oil pipeline, the central processing facility and the refinery required ahead of production.
The United Nations has said several cities around the world could sink into the sea. This is attributed to global warming, which could cause major humanitarian crises and more economic and social effect. One of these cities is the northern Egyptian city of Alexandria, from where Marco Baleke reports.
Alexandria overlooks the Mediterranean Sea. For centuries, its vast coastlines have made it a destination for trade and tourism. Those beautiful beaches are in threat of going undersea because of global warming. Experts say if no action is taken, parts of Alexandria could disappear by 2050. The higher temperatures would eat out the coastline.
The defrosting of ice in the North Pole because of the higher temperatures leads to a rise in water levels, which is dangerous on cities that are lower than sea levels. The water levels at the Mediterranean, for example, have risen by 11 centimeters in the last 100 years. The main cause is the human abuse of energy since the Industrial Revolution. This led to global warming with its environmental hazards.
This has been a worrying aspect for its residents.
The Delta and Alexandria, they say, will sink in a few years. We should all play a part in avoiding this by being environmentally aware. We should use clean energy, and factories should install filters.
We should begin with ourselves. We teach environment in the new school curriculum, and preserving environment for the next generations will prevent us from moving people out of Alexandria.
The government has already moved to avoid such a daunting situation.
The state is working hard at building construction that blocks the water level increase, and the proof is that Alexandria has not felt the effects and its beaches have been untouched in spite of the rising sea level.
What matters more is that the international community should move collectively to stop global warming and its effects before it's too late.
When we return, international news. Iran threatens full-scale war if Saudi's US attack. And later, sport. ICPC investigates head of the women unit of the Nigeria Football Federation.
You are watching ANN.
Whether in your house, at your office, on your phone or online, we are there. We have the facts behind the headlines. We cut to the chase with the news you really need. We cover every angle. We are the bigger, better news network. We are African News Network. ANN. Watch ANN News on MITV from a truly African spirit.
Welcome back. This is ANN News. Now to international stories. Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif has warned that any military attack by the United States or Saudi Arabia on his country will result in an outright war. Tensions in the Gulf continue to rise after attacks on Saudi Arabia's oil infrastructure stopped the production of 5% of the world's oil supply. The Trump administration also blamed Iran for recent attacks on the kingdom's oil infrastructure. Iran has consistently denied it was involved in the attacks. Both Washington and Riyadh have presented physical evidence and other details they said boosted their assertions of direct Iranian culpabilities. Amnesty International has accused Hong Kong police of human rights abuses, including torture, in their handling of pro-democracy protests. Amnesty says police used unnecessary and excessive force in making arrests, beat a protester for declining to answer a question, and then pinned him to the floor, shined laser pens in the eyes of people who had been detained, and threatened to electrocute a man's genitals after he refused to unlock his phone. AI said it released its findings after an investigation that included interviews with 21 arrested protesters, corroborating interviews with healthcare workers who treated demonstrators, and lawyers representing people who had been detained. The human rights group says of the 21 protesters interviewed, 18 were hospitalized for injuries or illnesses related to their arrests and detention. Leader of Israel's Blue and White Party, Benny Gantz, has rejected an offer by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to join forces in a governing coalition under his administration. Gantz is Netanyahu's main challenger in Israel's general election, and he believes he would be the next prime minister. With more than 97% of the votes counted, the centrist Blue and White Party has 33 seats, while Netanyahu's Likud party is behind with 31. Falling way short of the majority figure of 61. Netanyahu says he was surprised and disappointed by the party's rejection of the offer. Gantz says Israelis were eager for a unity government to end the political uncertainty. The Electoral Commission figures shows 70% of eligible voters turned out to vote on Tuesday in Israel's second general election since April polls. A UK Supreme Court will announce a decision early next week on whether it was illegal for Prime Minister Boris Johnson to prorogue Parliament. The government argues prorogation is not a matter for the court, but critics say the Prime Minister is trying to stop MPs scrutinizing his Brexit policy. In a submission to the court, the government says if judges ruled against Johnson, it will still either be open or not open to the Prime Minister to consider a further prorogation. Former Conservative Prime Minister Sir John Major says it is obvious there is a Prime Minister who stands accused of misleading the monarch and undermining Parliament. In very bold and strong terms, Sir Major accused Boris Johnson of having misled the Queen and suggesting his true purpose was entirely political. Hundreds of thousands of protesters have gathered in cities across Asia, calling for action against climate change ahead of the United Nations Summit. From the Pacific Islands to Australia and India, protesters took to the street to demand for urgent steps to tackle the climate crisis and prevent an environmental catastrophe. Rallies were also planned in Europe, Africa, and the United States. Organizers estimated 300,000 people turned up for the global climate strike in Australia, the world's largest exporter of coal and liquid natural gas. Protests were staged in more than 100 towns and cities across the country, with crowds calling on the government to commit to a target of net zero carbon emissions by 2030.
Still ahead, sports. ICPC investigates head of the women's unit of the NFF.
Watching ANN.
We are on the road every day, canvassing throughout Africa for news you really need. We follow the story everywhere, from every corner of Nigeria to the wide African expanse. We bring you what's making headlines. We connect you with news you can use. ANN, African News Network, in a truly African spirit.
Welcome back. This is ANN News and Sport. The Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Commission is investigating the women's unit of the Nigeria Football Federation. Reports say the Federation's head of women's football unit, Ruth David, appeared before the commission earlier today. The leadership of the NFF is under probe for embezzlement and irreconcilable transactions. The latest FIBA rankings shows the Tigers have moved up 10 places from 33rd to 23rd and they still remain number 1 in Africa. The 2015 AfroBasket champions who have qualified for the 2020 Tokyo Olympics are followed by Angola, Tunisia, Senegal and Ivory Coast. The USA remain the top-ranked team in the world, Spain is second and Australia third. That is ANN News this evening. Thank you for joining us. For details on these and other breaking stories, visit our website, annafrica.news. Conversation continues on our social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at ANN Africa TV. I am Olajumoke Olatunji. Have a great weekend.